You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the Unsolved Colonial Parkway Murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group, together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas. Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas.
And we're joined today by journalist and podcaster Courteney Stuart, here to answer all of our questions about the Shenandoah murders and the mysterious death of Darrell David Rice. Courteney, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
For those of our listeners that might not live in or near Charlottesville, Virginia, tell us a little bit about yourself to start off with. Let's assume that we have people from all over the world, which we do, and they might not listen to you unless they listen online. So tell us about Courteney Stuart.
I have been a journalist working in Charlottesville since the late 1990s, and I have worked for a number of different outlets, including newspapers. I was a television reporter for CBS 19, and I currently host a radio show called Charlottesville Right Now on WINA. And so I cover all kinds of issues, but I have, over the years, specifically focused on criminal justice, but also unsolved murders. And some of them happened while I was reporting. So from the time it first happens through years of a case not being solved. I also did a podcast called Small Town Big Crime. I have a colleague on that, Rachel Ryan. That was a deep dive that we did over a number of years into the claims by Jens Soring that he was an innocent man. He was convicted of first-degree murders of his then-girlfriend's parents. They were UVA students, he and Elizabeth Haysom. And so Small Town Big Crime, Jens Soring and the Haysom murders is available on all platforms. And then that also got wrapped into a Netflix special called Till Murder, Do Us Part, Soring versus Haysom. That's my most recent investigative reporting that people might have seen.
You have just one heck of a resume here, Courteney, and you've worked in a number of different mediums. You worked for the weekly alternative newspaper, The Hook. You worked as a television reporter, a talk radio host, now podcast. Which of these is your favorite medium, or should we not even be making you choose?
I think that each medium has real strengths, and I've learned a lot about storytelling, and I think each one brings a unique aspect. My passion is for deep investigative reporting, and print was where I learned to do that. And at the Hook newspaper, I had an opportunity that I think was really just an incredible chance for journalists to be able to do reporting of that nature week after week for close to 12 years. And after that, I went to TV, where it's a faster turns. It's a daily kind of thing. I could get into depth, but just I'd have to do it day by day. And so it wasn't the same, but I learned visual storytelling. And so podcasting was thrilling to me because it is essentially the same thing as the long form print reporting, in that you can go so in depth. And that's where the audience for this kind of long form content is. And also, to a degree, I think docuseries also as a way. So there was a lot of talk, I know, for a while as newsrooms were shrinking, that people just don't have the bandwidth. They don't want long form journalism. And it turns out it's just the medium and how people are taking in long form content that is changed.
I've likened podcasting, and perhaps the kind of podcasting that Kristin and I do, to talk radio. But you actually now, in the last couple of years, have been hosting a daily show on Charlottesville's talk radio station. What's that like?
I love it. I absolutely love it. It's fast-paced. It's not, of course, it's not all true crime focused, although because that is one of my interests, I certainly cover criminal justice matters, not only cold cases, but also criminal justice sort of system issues. So prison issues, all kinds of things. I love the chance to talk to people about all different kinds of things, and I can do breaking news. If something happens one morning, I can try to line up a guest and have it be very timely. If I want to go in more depth, I can extend an interview over a number of segments so I can have a longer conversation. So in that way, it is like podcasting in the sort of interview format. The podcast I did was a scripted, serialized podcast. So it was one case that we investigated. Each episode was written and then tracked. So it's a different format. And I think that's cool about podcasting too, is that you can have these different formats that allow for different types of content.
How in the world do you get all of this work done? I can't imagine being as busy as you are. We're busy people, but you're definitely taking the medal on busiest person here. How do you sleep?
Not very much. Yesterday, I don't know. Sometimes I love this work and I love doing it. And I'm also always trying to find out how I can keep doing it. And so that's part of the reason that I've been like swimming through all these mediums is if I see that maybe this opportunity is narrowing, I want to find the next opening and I want to keep building on my skills. And journalism is my passion. I think it's so important. Cold cases and investigating cases is something that is really, really important to me because I have seen the impact not only of the loss that people experience in a crime, but then the ongoing impact of not knowing and just never being able to, I think closure is the wrong word, but never being able to have answers that you need and having just this shadow in your life for years and years. And so feeling like those people know that somebody hasn't forgotten, somebody cares, somebody is still trying to get answers. Because sometimes law enforcement drops off. They don't have anything else to report. And in that place, like advocates and journalists are the ones who can continue keeping a case alive. And so I'm really motivated by that. And in that way, I don't mind that I kind of work all the time.
For the record, we were messaging back and forth, Kristin, Courteney, and Bill, just to confirm today's conversation. And I noticed, I think you texted me at 4:49 a.m. and you're not normally going to get a text. You might get a text out of Kristin.
All right, Dilley. I hope it didn't wake you up.
No. You might get a text out of Kristin that early, but you're not going to get one out of me at 4:49. Were you really up?
That's usually when I'm up for school. So
yeah.
I am I go to the gym I go to a 5:30 class. Usually my workout friends are going to be like, but you haven't been there if they hear this. So I can't take credit for doing it all the time, but that is the time I try to go to the gym. And I am I just love getting up. I have people be like, are you up or are you still up? Which one is it?
Did you ever go to sleep kind of thing?
Yeah, no, I do go to sleep and I actually go to sleep pretty early. Like I'm usually just starting to collapse by like 9. But I love early mornings. I'm like at my most energetic, which is probably super annoying for a lot of people, but it is.
You two larks, as they're referred to. There are owls, which is me, and there are larks, which is the two of you.
Actually, Bill, I'm not a lark or an owl. I'm just a permanently exhausted pigeon.
Okay.
Listen, you get up to go to school. Is that what you said? Or what's this?
Yeah, so I do teach full time. Obviously, I'm on summer break right now. And because I live half an hour away from my school and I commute, if I want to be there on time, and I always get there early because I'm that kind of person, I'm up by 4:30 in the morning and I hate everything about it, but it is what it is.
I think I got into it because I had kids and I was just like, oh my gosh, it's dark and quiet and I'm alone. And that was just my time. And then it just stuck. Because they're out of the house now and I'm still doing it. I've got 2 sons, but they're both in their 20s. One's about to turn 25 and one is 21.
Uh-huh. You were a child bride because the math clearly doesn't work.
I was in elementary school.
I want to get into the news. Of course, it's been on everybody's mind for the last couple of weeks since this case broke. You've been following the Julie Williams Lollie Winans murder in the Shenandoah National Park and the Route 29 Stalker case since the beginning. Why do you think that those cases went unsolved for so long?
I was not actively covering those cases from the beginning. I became aware of them probably almost immediately upon arriving to Charlottesville in 1997. And then I got my first full-time journalism job actually at Seaville Weekly in 98. So they were still relatively new and it was a big deal. Both the murders and Julie and Lollie were both almost exactly the same age as I am, or they would be. It was a case that just stood out to me because these were my peers. These were people exactly my age. And this was just so horrifying. And this was a place that I had been. Over the years, I read other people's reporting. I didn't do really my own reporting on it until Darrell Rice was released from prison in 2007. And he went back to Maryland and the uproar that came up. So that's when I, as a reporter, got involved at all in covering the case. It's hard to know why it took so long. I think the revelation through DNA, a DNA match that is this guy, Walter Leo Jackson, suggests that it was just so random. I still don't understand how they know that he came to the park, they said he was known to come to the park. They didn't give that information when they announced the DNA match. So I have so many questions that I think might help shed light on how he slipped past authorities' notice for so long. Yes. And then, of course, there is the question and probably many questions around the targeting of Darrell Rice that went on for so long. And I think it's understandable that he was a suspect after what happened in the park in 97 with Yvonne Malbasha. But it seems in hindsight that there's a lot that could have, and maybe probably should have eliminated him. There are also things that I have read that I would like to try to get to the bottom of that help me understand a little bit why investigators would have found him so interesting. I just don't know about the extent or the time. And I also do not understand exactly what was tested, what led to the DNA match, and how early that testing could have been done. So those are some of my thoughts.
I think the FBI and the National Park Service and the Virginia State Police are trying to head off criticism in both the Colonial Parkway Murders case with the January press conference earlier this year and with the Shenandoah National Park murders of Julie Williams and Lollie Winans. You're not the only journalist we've talked to in the past few months who has said they cannot get any further information. It's very frustrating. I think they owe the American public a better explanation than they're currently giving us in both the Colonial Parkway murders and perhaps even worse in the Shenandoah National Park murders. What's your take on that?
So let's just talk. We could go back to the January 8th press announcement of Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. in the Colonial Parkway murders, but the June press conference is the one that I listened in on. And from the moment it was announced, I thought it was unusual and questionable because as members of the press, we got this press release saying it was like in 2 hours, there will be an announcement, a significant announcement in this nearly 30-year-old case, right? A huge profile. And this like nothing announcement slips into our inboxes 2 hours before, and it actually appears to be an audio-only press conference. That's how it's framed. And obviously, cameras did end up going, but it wasn't even clear where it was happening, how it was happening. I've never seen a major announcement handled like that. I'm used to standing probably in the federal courthouse in a press room with evidence being shown, like a proud display of, and then we did this, and then we did this. And it just didn't happen like that. It was bizarre. And I find that really bizarre. Like, for instance, they say the new DNA testing has allowed us to now definitively say that Lollie and Julie were sexually assaulted. Okay, how? Why? What did you collect something? I don't want to be graphic, but was there evidence collected from inside their bodies? What was the evidence? How can DNA evidence being developed prove that that sexual assault has taken place if you didn't have the evidence before? Because that's not been something that was claimed. So that's just one of the questions that I have. I also have questions about when and what evidence was tested. How early could this have been done? Why did this take so long? I know the funding. They cited the SAKI, which is the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative it's federal funds, but it's administered through the Virginia Attorney General's office. And so he sent out a press release after that, making sure his office got credit for being part of closing these two, or bringing new information. I guess the Colonial Parkway murders have not been closed because some of them, there is no match, but there are many questions. And I think that the way it was announced leaves me really wondering, just like you, about why they don't want to answer more questions, because it's something they've just done, something that you would think they should be proud of. They've just solved a case. And
our friend Kate Miles, who wrote the book Trailed about Julie and Lollie's case, she came on our podcast right afterward, and she said that she really wanted to see the FBI show their work. And I really like that term, not only because I'm a teacher, but also because it just makes sense. Kate had pointed out that when the Golden State Killer case broke, they were more than happy to stand up there. Like you said, we've got charts, we've got graphs, we'd like to tell you all of the things that we did. Look at our awesome work. That didn't happen here. And I really do have to wonder, why are you not willing to show what you did, show your work?
Yeah, I have read Kate's book. I have not met her, but she clearly knows so much about this case. And I totally agree with her about show your work. I think that's a really good way to put it. And I think in other cases, when they have done something, they have shown so much more. And so absence of that kind of showing your work that leads to questions about what are you hiding? What is,
Exactly.
or is there something you're hiding? I don't know that they're hiding something, but when you do something in this kind of weird, shady way and you're not forthcoming about the details that people legitimately want to know, you ask for questions to be raised. It's really hard to understand.
One of the things that really jumps out at me, Courteney, is that your complaints from a moment ago as a journalist about 2 hours notice and an unclear press release and not specifying who was welcome, where this press conference would actually take place. First of all, I'm just going to say it. All of this stuff is being done by the FBI deliberately. They did it in the Colonial Parkway Murders announcement, and then they did it again in the Shenandoah Park Murders announcement. There's a pattern here that's very unfortunate. As someone who's really pulling for law enforcement and their success in these cases, Kristin and I and the families, we are still looking for answers in the Colonial Parkway murders and other unsolved murders. So to see this pattern where press conferences are announced on almost no notice, and as you said, 30-year-old events, a lot of work went into getting us to where we are today. And actually the news is positive and exciting. And the FBI, the National Park Service, and the Virginia State Police should be proud to let the people of Virginia and across the country and around the world that have been following these cases, let us know how you solved this case. I don't know why there's this failure. Kate puts it, show your work. Take pride in your work. Good hard work went into these cases. What's up with all the secrecy?
Yeah, I can't, as a journalist, I can't say I know what's up with all the secrecy. I certainly feel it. And just to go back to that press conference, the 2 hours notice, the impact of that, it doesn't matter as much for me as a radio reporter now who has a show because audio is all I need. But it doesn't give television crews a chance to go get set up. It doesn't give reporters from larger outlets from out of the area who would want to have somebody come in for the announcement. Mm-hmm. It doesn't give them time to do that. And when you were talking about small markets, you're talking about young reporters who are early in their careers who don't have the historical memory of these cases. So it doesn't give them time to even get up to speed to do the kind of in-depth reporting that you want them to do.
I received from an anonymous source inside the investigation. I'm going to rough out the quote so that I'm not outing anyone. This is obviously someone inside law enforcement who said, "We did this deliberately. This scheduling of the press conferences at the last minute is done deliberately." They actually said they don't want the most experienced reporters to come and cover the case and the people with the history, in some cases stretching back over 30 years. They actually don't want those reporters. So they want, and I'm not taking anything away from new reporters, but they want the staff reporter who's on duty that day to be assigned the case. What a television reporter colleague of yours said to me was, they know good and goddamn well that the top reporters talk to their news directors or their editors each morning and get their assignments. And so they know what story they're going to be going out and covering and whether they're meeting up with technical personnel, camera, audio, whatever. And they are usually well on their way to covering stories in the morning that will be broadcast later on during the radio or television day, whatever it is. They did this deliberately, and they admitted it privately and anonymously. They did this deliberately in both of these cases so that the top reporters wouldn't be able to cover the story. It's being done flat out to manipulate the process.
And again, that is something somebody said to you, and I don't doubt it, but just since I don't have that firsthand information, I can see that something is strange about it. I agree that that is the dynamic it creates. Newsrooms are used to responding to breaking news situations. So somebody who's on their way to one story can easily be detoured or called off, but it makes it, since they didn't even say, they said it was a major development, it does make it less likely. And if somebody's too far away, they can't get there. And then they aren't offering follow-ups, right? So it's not, we know this was hastily announced, and this didn't need to be that kind of breaking news stories. I think the evidence of what you're saying, even from the outside without having the firsthand knowledge, I can see that is the dynamic that's created. And it's concerning because there are such problems that are apparent in both of these investigations, from Wilmer having been an early suspect that they let slip away to having chased the wrong guy for decades in the Shenandoah Park case. It's not hard to see the things that they don't want to be asked about.
Now, 16 days after the press conference on the solve in the Julie Williams, Lollie Winans murders, we get the absolutely bizarre news that Darrell David Rice had died in a cycling accident. That blew my mind. And your reporting was the first reporting that I saw on it. What was your response when you first got that news? My jaw hit the floor when I read your reporting. What was yours?
Oh, it was just that. It was like, just oh my God. Like, is this true? And in fact, I didn't report it until I confirmed. I was like, okay, what if it's not, this is just too much. It's too much. And I had heard it. So I waited until I got the sheriff on the phone and I got the date of birth of the Darrell Rice who died, to at least just to make sure that I wasn't going to report something this stunning without having confirmed it, because it's just unbelievable. And then that what is he doing? He's riding at night through Missouri, some rural route. It's not clear where he's been. It's heartbreaking. I think this was not my reporting, but someone else's, that he may not have even known that he had been exonerated. I don't know. And I don't know if that answer is known yet, if anybody had talked to him and could confirm, because that's just heartbreaking if that's the case, that I don't know what his living conditions were. I know that he had been chased away from lots of places. His sister issued just a scathing statement about the effect of the reporting on his life, what had happened to him in the aftermath of this. And that was before he died. I haven't seen any comments from her since, but just incredible, and not in a good way, just unbelievable that this happened so soon.
Yeah, we don't have any update there either, but when we talked to the people from the Innocence Project, they were not certain. He is a guy who had essentially moved off the grid, and I know people use that expression all the time, but this is a guy without a phone, without a computer. If you think about it, think about the way we communicate now, even just the three of us setting up this conversation. If you don't have a phone and you don't have a computer, you've really made yourself hard to reach. He did that, I think, to protect himself from further harassment. One thing I can't get over is his last known address was outside Durango, Colorado. And I checked the map, and he's struck and killed by a car on a rural highway in central Missouri. It's 1,100 miles away from his last known address. His family and the Innocence Project attorneys who worked with him for years had funded a previous ride across the country where he rode from Colorado, where he was living at that time, to Maryland, where he had family. He wasn't able to do that without some financial assistance. He didn't have enough money for food or spare tubes for his bicycle. He would have had the physical strength, I think, to make that ride. But I want to take a small comfort. I don't know this man, and I'm actually not crazy about Darrell Rice and what I've read of his history. He doesn't.
Yeah, his history. He's not squeaky clean.
He didn't kill Julie and Lollie, though, and he had a lot of issues, and I think he had a lot of serious mental health issues. Part of me just wants to take some small comfort in the idea, and it's just a thought, that he somehow found out that he had been exonerated. And then he made a decision to ride across the country to return to see family or whatever. Because I can't figure out what the heck he's doing in central Missouri.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's a question. When's the last time that anybody had contact with him, his sister, his family, Deirdre Enright, his longtime advocate? She said, I think at the press conference that she had with his attorney, his capital defense attorney, she said that they had not spoken to him since this news had broken. And this was days later. Her press conference was on a Monday, and the announcement, I believe, of the DNA match was on a Thursday. So over the weekend, and they certainly would have been desperately trying to reach him. That would have been, unless they were able to reach him at some point in the next 2 weeks, right? That was the only time. It was 15 days later, 15 days from announcement to his death.
You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. We're back here at Mind Over Murder. Before we get back to the podcast, just wanted to remind you that we have a GoFundMe effort going on right now. This campaign is designed to help us raise funds to help promote Mind Over Murder and specifically to push the Colonial Parkway Murders investigation forward. We'd love it if you could support us in any way that you can. Any donation from $5 to whatever you can afford is very much appreciated and will be incredibly helpful. The link is in the show notes and in our social media pages. As always, thanks for your support. Now back to Mind Over Murder.
The announcement of the resolve in the Shenandoah case did make national headlines, but Darrell's death did not receive any national media attention or enough national media attention, I think. Why do you think that might be?
I don't remember who there was. Okay, this came to my attention not through any sort of press release. This came to my attention when somebody sent me a link to a story about this bicycle fatality that didn't even mention anything about his longtime position as a suspect in this case. It was just like 50, I don't know how old he was, but it's Darrell D. Rice was struck and killed. It was just like a bicycle fatality news story, like a nothing little story in some Missouri paper. And so that's when I called. But I think if nobody sends out a press release and nobody in the newsrooms, I did my story for WINA and I put that online. And I know there was reporting in the Daily Progress about it. And there may have been some other, but it's shocking that wasn't, because it is just, I don't know, irony, a coincidence. I don't know what the right word is, but the tragedy of it certainly elevates it to national newsworthiness.
It feels like Greek tragedy, I think, is what I told Bill when it happened. I really feel awful for the guy. Like Bill said, I'm not a fan of his, but he certainly didn't deserve what he got from the FBI, and he definitely did not deserve to die this way. I feel really awful for him for that reason.
The description of that afternoon when I got this, I read this news story, and I thought I have to confirm that it's him before I can report it. And I talked to the sheriff, and he had seen him earlier that day at a store. And I was like, how do you remember something like that? He said, this is just a tiny town and everybody knows everybody. And so when somebody's a stranger, they stick out. And I saw this old guy on a bike. And I said, can I send you a picture of him so you can confirm his identity? That was the first way. And I sent it. And that does not look like the guy I saw. Granted, this was an older picture, but he and the deputies all said that this person looked significantly older, like they were describing him as an old guy, and he's in his 50s. Yeah, I don't know what had happened to him, where he'd been, or where he was going. It sounds like he's heading west, so probably to Colorado.
So much about this story, and then back to the press conference from the Colonial Parkway murders, so much of this just doesn't sit right. It doesn't feel right. I said to Kristin recently, one of the things I'm very disturbed about is all of the suspects that are being identified are all conveniently dead. And now Darrell David Rice, a longtime suspect, has ended up conveniently dead. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist at all. I find it very odd that none of these suspects are being identified when they're alive. The prosecutors are saying very confidently from the front of the room, this person would be brought up on murder charges if they were alive. But they don't have to bother going through that whole process because they're only identifying people after their deaths. And especially when we've seen for decades in both the Colonial Parkway murders and the Shenandoah Park murders, this bizarre foot dragging by law enforcement. What are they waiting for? Are they waiting for these people to die and then suddenly they're going to go up front and say, we got him? We didn't, did we?
I think that's where the show your work comes in, because when you don't have those answers, you're left to speculate. And even people who are not conspiracy minded are left with a set of facts they are really unsatisfied. They're unsatisfactory because you can't go ask the people who have been matched by DNA. You can't see any of the evidence that they tested or their work, the method that they used to identify these people. Now you can't talk to Darrell Rice. I will say what the sheriff told me about that case is that the department had received calls about somebody in a way that drivers were very concerned about. And so they were actually headed out because there was a bicyclist riding in the middle of the road or something like that. That's what he said to me. I would want to get more details from the deputies who actually were going to the scene, because what he was telling me was probably secondhand. This is what his deputies had told him. And it was soon after. I think I was the first reporter to talk to him. But there was definitely something alarming to other people about the way he was riding and the time of night and the fact that he was not visible. And then I think the deputies may have even been almost on scene and they saw him be struck. I don't know the circumstances around that. It sounds like just a tragic accident.
There's something I would very much like to see, and the sheriff should be able to provide this. I'd like to see photographs of the bicycle. I'm not asking to see photographs of some poor man that's been hit by a car, and I can imagine that's not something most of us would want to see. But as someone, as a younger man who did a fair amount of long-distance cycling, I know what a bike that's been set up or long rides and the kind of panniers and packs and things like that, even somebody traveling on the down and dirty would have likely a sleeping bag and some small degree of equipment with them, some tools, a couple of spare tubes, that sort of thing. I'd really like to see photographs of Rice's bicycle and see, is this bicycle even capable of being ridden 1,100 miles, whether it's eastbound or westbound, I don't know. He's 1,000 miles away from his last known address. I'd like to see that bike and just get a sense, would this bike have even taken him from point A to point B?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, something be very interesting to see that, and also interesting to see if there's been any more information found out about where he had stayed last, when he was last in Colorado, when he was last in Virginia, what was the last conversation people had with him. Yeah, I don't know the answers to those things.
Before we leave Darrell David Rice behind, I did want to ask one final question about a recent piece of reporting that you did. You interviewed the retired forensic psychologist, Jeff Fratcher, on Charlottesville Right Now about his examination of Darrell Rice. What did he happen to say about Darrell David Rice and his thoughts on whether or not he was capable of committing the Shenandoah murders?
So he said he interviewed Darrell Rice as, I guess he was hired by Darrell Rice's defense attorney after the attack on Yvonne Malbasha, the bicyclist in the Shenandoah National Park in 97. And that's what put him on the radar, of course, as the suspect in the 1996 murders. He said he did not believe that he was capable of murder, that he thought he said he kind of a weird guy, mental health problems, and I think a history of heavy drug use, but he did not see any signs that this was somebody who would be capable of a double homicide. There's an assessment, a psychological assessment that they had available to them in the late 90s. I also will say, I've known Jeff a long time. I think the world of him. I actually didn't know he had done the assessment. I just wanted him to come in as like a general forensic psychologist to talk about stuff. And then he's like, oh yeah, I did that assessment. And I was like, so that was great. But he was hired by the defense. So I don't know that prosecutors would have taken everything or investigators might have seen him as giving them the answers that the defense wanted.
But it was his sincere, thoughtful analysis that, in his professional opinion, he did not think that Rice was capable of a double homicide. It was clear he did understand that Rice had attacked Yvonne Malbasha and that he did have some very serious issues. So it's not like he's making him out to be a Boy Scout.
No, he's not making him out to be a Boy Scout. I think Yvonne Malbasha's description of that attack and the way Darrell Rice's defense team, supporters, advocates have described it, there's a big difference between those two things. The description, the transcripts that I've seen of her account, it was very frightening. And then there was this attempt, his attempt to get out of the park, change license plates. There were disturbing items or potentially disturbing items found in the truck. I think zip ties, but you could say maybe he needed them for something else, but these were, I think, long enough to be used to tie somebody up. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I think his defense team has really downplayed. And like at the press conference that Monday, after the DNA match was announced, they again really presented that as like he threw a water bottle. That doesn't make him a killer, but it really was more than throwing a water bottle. And I think that for people who are on the other side, it's like that underplaying that doesn't help either, because it seems like the reality was it was a terrifying incident for Yvonne Malbasha, and she believed that he intended to kill her.
I do have a question about another notorious case in that area, and that would be the Route 29 Stalker case. During the press conference, the FBI released a seeking information poster about Walter Leo Jackson, and one of the things that they mentioned was the fact that he did have access to several vehicles. He was known to alter and change out license tags. Do you think that was the FBI kind of setting up this idea that Walter Leo Jackson could be the Route 29 stalker, or was that just them presenting information that they had available?
They then also, in that, I'm going from memory, but I believe they said we have no information to suggest that he was on Route 29 or anything like that, right? So they they specified that they don't have a reason to suspect him. However, they also didn't manage to link him to the Shenandoah Park for nearly 30 years. And I also don't know what DNA testing has been conducted, for instance, in the Alicia Showalter Reynolds case. Can he be eliminated from evidence there? Is there anything that has been done? That's something I don't know the answer. Maybe there is an answer. Maybe you guys know the answer. I don't, off the top of my head, but I am curious. And I know obviously they have been doing this intense new round of testing on old cases. So I wonder if they're running tests on Colonial Parkway and Shenandoah Park, I would think that they would also be running tests on Alicia Showalter Reynolds.
We can hope. Yeah.
I'd like to know that. And we are working on nailing that down, but it's difficult because law enforcement won't answer questions, which is infuriating. Even in questions in my own sister's case, they will not answer questions in a straightforward manner. We are working through other sources. I didn't say something earlier. I hope longtime listeners of this podcast understand that there are times when I will pass along information that I've received from people inside this investigation, and I can't name names because those sources will completely dry up or get fired for all I know. I think people understand that when I say we heard this from sources inside this investigation, they're 100% clear. I don't need to make stuff up. We're working now to try to find out what is happening with the rest of this investigation. And the Route 29 Stalker case is another example of a case that really needs a significant reboot. That's a Virginia State Police case. They've done some really good work. I would just love for them, as you're saying, Courtney, to be revisiting this and going back through the evidence, much like the FBI, the National Park Service, and the Virginia State Police did recently. Even though we're frustrated, they are solving cases and identifying suspects, and I have to give them props for that.
It's a good thing to have these DNA matches, and everybody can wish that it happened a long time ago, but it's better that it happened at all. But there's still so many questions. You hope they're doing it, and you also hope that they are revealing as much information as they can. Everybody understands that investigations require some level of confidentiality. You don't want to risk not being able to get the solution. In the cases that they've already closed with these DNA matches, they're not providing a good reason why they can't give more information.
This wasn't originally on my list of questions, but since I've got you here, I'm going to go ahead and ask anyway.
Go for it.
There was some supposition running around a couple of months back that the suspect in the Gilgo Beach or killings, Rex Heuermann, might potentially be a Route 29 stalking suspect. What are your thoughts on that? I just have to know.
I heard the same thing. I was like, oh my gosh. I'm trying to remember. Stranger things have happened. Look, like Walter Leo Jackson somehow gets from Cleveland. And his victims in Cleveland, as far as I know, are they're women that are drug addicted, possibly in prostitution. And just so I say that not to judge the victims, but to say it's not the same MO as going camping in the park, right? It's like totally different. Women in your neighborhood that you've seen every day and who are vulnerable in that way versus the camp. But to the Gilgo Beach thing, I think it was the timing. And then I think somewhere somebody said he has a family member who lives, and they said nearby.
His mom.
I think nearby was this area.
I know it well enough. They said that she lived nearby in Orange, but that's not as nearby.
Yeah, I was like,
not as nearby as I would associate with Route 29.
Yeah, because Darrell Rice's father lived within a couple of miles of where Alicia Showalter Reynolds' body was found. That's nearby, right? That gives you reason to think, okay, we got to at least look at him because there is this. We know he stays within a few miles of this site, and it gives you something to look at. I don't know with Gilgo Beach. I don't think anything came of that. I certainly hope that I hope they run down the lead. If he had a pickup truck or he was known to be driving 29 at that time, it's certainly worth checking. The other weird thing is this question, and do you guys know if they have been able to put Wilmer's DNA through CODIS? There was some kind of reason that they couldn't do that, right?
The claim, and I am rolling my eyes here, and listeners know this is a hot button for us. The claim is that Under Virginia state policy, Commonwealth of Virginia policy, unless you've been charged with a felony, your DNA cannot be put into CODIS. And obviously, Wilmer's dead and has been dead since 2017, so we're not putting his DNA into CODIS. And at the same time, and I say this through gritted teeth, Wilmer's dead. Who cares? His rights died with him. Where are the families and the victims in all of this? Why are we so concerned about respecting Wilmer's rights when the man's been dead for what, 7 years?
That is an idiotic loophole. If there is a law that says you can't do that, when somebody has been definitively matched by DNA to one murder, they are dead themselves, that you can't put their DNA into the databank to see if you could close other cases. I can't imagine anyone anywhere on the political spectrum objecting to that, right? That is, like you said, it's victim first. The victims need answers. If the person has been matched to a brutal homicide, I think they're dead. Their right to privacy. Of course, you don't want police being able to plug anybody's DNA into the go hunting for people. There are problems with that. But under the circumstance, if somebody has been linked to one violent crime and they're deceased, you tell me, I don't understand what the argument could possibly be. And if there is a law, I would think that there's a legislator out there who would love to close that loophole.
We're not going to let this one go. We're still trying to find out exactly how this rule works. One of the things our listeners have been baffled by, the CODIS system, which is way less than perfect, as we all know, it's set up, it's actually 50 different systems. The rules are different state to state, and I think this is insane and needs to be changed. But one step at a time here. Wilmer is a serial killer by a FBI official definition. If you're identified to have killed 3 or more people in 2 or more incidents, you're considered a serial killer. So Wilmer is a serial killer, and I don't think anybody is going to argue passionately that his rights are somehow being violated when all we're trying to do is confirm, was he involved in other unsolved murders and sexual assaults? And I don't think that's an unreasonable thing for us to seek.
That is something, if there is some argument against putting his DNA through the system to see if there's a hit on other cases, I can't imagine what it is, like anything that makes any sense. I just can't imagine that.
Courteney, you're very busy, and I know that you've probably got a couple of different projects coming up soon. Can you tell us a little bit about what's next for you? What should we be looking for?
Yeah, so I have been working on all different kinds of things. So I have my daily radio show. I also continue to do work with my podcast partner, Rachel Ryan, who I did Small Town Big Crime with. And we have spent the last couple of years looking at a bunch of cold cases, because we're really only interested in working on cases where there's an answer that people still need or something. And the Shenandoah murders is one that we were really looking into. Everything changed, as everybody knows, with the DNA match and then the death of Darrell Rice. But as we've just discussed, we do still feel like there are incredibly important questions to be answered. So while it's no longer a cold case and Julie and Lollie's families have the answer that they need, I think that there are questions that are still really valid to be asked in that. So that is one of the cases. And then we have several others that are really heartbreaking cases from the Charlottesville area that we are continuing to look into to see if we think we can make some progress and to do more in-depth storytelling.
So we'll see more episodes of Small Town Big Crime in the future, not necessarily next week.
I'm not sure what form our storytelling will take, but yes, you will see more storytelling from us. We are still trying to work out the details of what that will look like. We started working on a book. We've done a whole bunch of different things. We've looked into video storytelling. We have a YouTube channel that is not at the, I would say it's not at the level of production quality that it would need to be to really do the kind of work that we want to do. But I've worked in all these platforms and I love storytelling of all forms. And so I just look for whatever way is going to let me do the work and let me tell the stories.
Courteney, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure and we've loved having you.
I have loved being here. What a great conversation. Thank you both so much. And Kristin, it's really nice to meet you finally.
Oh, it's great to meet you too. That is going to do it for this episode of Mind Over Murder. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawlspace Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.